Hello YouTubers, RogueMonkeyJr here, and today I have a video that's a little bit different for all of you. So in today's video I wanted to touch on the topic of live service games and why they are a good and a bad thing at the same time. So if you don't know what a live service game is, or a game that offers live services, basically what it means is that a game will usually not have a premium pass or season pass, but rather have DLC content that is mostly funded by the microtransactions within the game, and they frequently update the game, bring new things out, new content, new weapons. I'm specifically talking here about first-person shooters because generally that's what I cover on the channel. So basically it's a service that just keeps a game fresh with brand new updates and content, as well as some special events every now and then, some unique unlockables or customization for your character or whatever the game you are playing may be. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what a live game service is. So in today's video I want to cover a little bit the pros and the cons of this specific way of building video games in the industry right now. So first of all, we're going to start with the pros. So first of all, live service games are pay to play once, and DLC content is usually free, and by free I made paid for by microtransactions within the game itself. So you basically pay to play once, and after that all the DLC that comes out is free for everyone and is usually funded by, as I said, the microtransactions. Good examples of these are Rainbow Six Siege or even Overwatch. So all of the content in Overwatch is free for everyone, no matter the version of the game you purchased. You are still going to get those new heroes, those new maps, those new game modes, the new arcade modes, and all that good stuff. So Overwatch is very much a live service game experience, as opposed to something like Battlefield or Call of Duty, which have season or premium passes that basically have the DLC locked behind a paywall and are not available to everybody if you don't pay for it. So that is one of the pros of having a live service game, is that the DLC content is pretty much always free. Of course, you do have some microtransactions, but that is expected in this day and age with gaming. The next pro is they can keep a game alive for quite some time with the proper support and frequent updates, or even revive a game's player base who has slowly trickled down. So here, what I'm saying is that the pro of having a live game service, or having a video game as a live service, is that it can often stretch out the life of that specific video games by exactly giving it constant updates, frequent DLCs, even if there are smaller DLC drops. Having something come out every month to 2 months keeps the game alive, keeps the game fresh, has players coming back. So that's something that is very good for the game itself, as it can keep players coming back for time and time again. Even if newer titles are coming out, players still keep playing that specific game because of the massive support it is getting, as well as those DLC content drops, those frequent updates, those special events, those unique customization options for your character, which is very much the case of Rainbow Six Siege. So Rainbow Six Siege, when it came out in November of 2015, didn't have the biggest player base for a AAA game studio or game publisher here. So Ubisoft launched Rainbow Six Siege and it didn't have a whole lot of people playing it. We're talking here about peak player counts of about 20 to 25,000 a few months only after the release of Rainbow Six Siege, which isn't a lot for a game that was published by Ubisoft. Usually they have AAA titles that have massive numbers, much like Call of Duty or Battlefield at launch, but this was kind of underwhelming. Granted, the game was kind of broken. There was a lot of netcode issues, there was a lot of hacking issues, so generally the experience wasn't the greatest at launch. But what Ubisoft did, they kept at it. They made Rainbow Six Siege a live game service, and it shows. The frequent DLC content drops, the frequent number of operators that have been added to the game, special events, customization, and the fact that it's only a $20 buy-in for the base version of the game, which only gives you 4 operators, but of course you can unlock these operators by simply playing the game, which is very cheap for players to actually get into the game. And it shows shows that they put a lot of work into this, because currently, as of recording this video, it is the 4th most played game on Steam, with about an hour ago a concurrent player number of 88,000 plus and a 24-hour peak of over 140,000. So that is massive numbers for a game that is just about to be 3 years old. So they made some massive improvements to Rainbow Six Siege, and they made it a success, even though in the beginning it wasn't a very good game and people didn't enjoy it that much, and you could tell by the numbers slowly dwindling down. But having that live service, they brought the game back, and it is bigger than ever. So one of the other pros that I kind of outlined here is the feeling that the game is alive and constantly evolving with new content. So this point kind of brings you back to the other point where I said that they're constantly bringing in new DLC, and that keeps a player engaged in the video game or coming back for all of these new content drops, as well as the special events, special game modes, unique items, and collectibles. In other words, you have the feeling that there's a lot more to do in the game having it as a live service, because it gives you stuff to work towards to frequently throughout the years of that game's lifespan. So moving into the cons part of the video, so the first one I want to touch on is devs promising a lot for live service games can be an enticing reason for you to purchase the game. However, if the game does not gain sufficient traction and engagement, the devs can decide to drop all plans for future DLC and content due to the lack of engagement, which you don't get with games that offer premium or season passes, as they have legal obligations to produce and release DLC content. Now let's take, for example, Star Wars Battlefront II. So, of course, there was a big fiasco last year with the egregious microtransactions that were in Star Wars Battlefront 2. But Star Wars Battlefront 2 was marketed as a live service game that would not have a season pass like Battlefield or the previous Battlefront title from 2015. So there would be DLC content throughout the year in seasons, but would be free to everybody and would be marketed as a live service game. Now, last week, or the beginning of this week, there was a leak that DICE and EA would be dropping most of the support for Star Wars Battlefront 2 because of its dwindling player count across all platforms. Now, unfortunately, there is no player count or no way to know the amount of players that are currently playing Star Wars Battlefront 2, so we don't really know for them what is a low player count, what is a high player count, but there generally hasn't been a whole lot of DLC content coming out for Star Wars Battlefront 2, and people who bought the game saying, okay, there's no, for example, there's not much of the Clone Wars in there, or there's not a whole lot of heroes that were in the 3 original Star Wars movies. So a lot of people and players bought the game saying, okay, they're going to bring this out in the future, and they actually said that they were going to do this. But now, seeing as the player numbers are dwindling, it seems that EA and DICE seem to be dropping the support for Star Wars Battlefront 2 and not following up on the DLCs that were promised in the first place. This might be largely due to the fact that a lot of people didn't play the game for very long following the big fiasco and debacle with the microtransactions. Let's take another example, Lawbreakers. So Lawbreakers is a game that was produced by Boss Key Productions, which is now closed. So Lawbreakers was a game that would not have a season pass or paid DLC content. It would be a game that would be a live service. And of course, we all know the failure that was Lawbreakers. Within a few months, the player numbers dwindled down to the double digits, and that is very, very unfortunate. It was a pretty decent game, it just failed to gain traction, and of course, eventually down the line, Boss Key Productions halted all support for Lawbreakers because it just wasn't worth the time and the money that they were investing in it. So games that are promised to be a live service can sometimes be a downside because you as a consumer buy the product and are promised or are enticed to buy that product because it is offered as a live game service, and you can foresee that there will be a lot of DLC content coming out in the future. But unfortunately, if that game doesn't get the desired traction and engagement, the devs can decide to pull support from that game for those reasons. So the next point I want to touch on is the sometimes inclusion of egregious microtransactions to, in quotation marks, pay for future DLC and content. So again, bringing back the example of Star Wars Battlefront 2, there was no season pass, there was no premium pass, it was offered as a live game service, and the DLC content coming out would be paid for by the microtransactions, which were very, very nasty when Star Wars Battlefront 2 launched. It was literally a pay-to-win game, and that didn't sit well with a large part of the community. So having a live service game can be good and all, but if the company offering the live game service has ill intents or only wants the money, then they might put some really shady shit in the game to be able to pay or have an excess of money to for those future DLC contents. Now, of course, with Star Wars Battlefront 2, those microtransactions were eventually changed, and the community won in quotation marks, but that doesn't mean that EA and other large publishers would not repeat the same things just to make a profit. The next point here is, so content and DLC is usually released in smaller doses and sometimes slower than traditional season or premium passes with live service games. So generally speaking, with a season or premium pass, you get a specific number of DLC content drops with a specific number of maps, weapons, and game modes and all that stuff. So it's usually set in stone, and the company that sells you the premium or season pass have legal obligations to fulfill the sale that they have with the consumer. So they cannot like cheap out and be like, okay, this game's dead, we're not going to bring out the content and DLC. They are obligated by law to release the content and DLC even if the player base is dwindling down. So with live game services, what mostly happens is you see maybe more content drops, but usually at a slower rate, and they are a lot smaller. So you might see one map every now and then, a few new weapons. So it's generally speaking, it's just content trickling down, and it can take a lot longer to have all of the content you were waiting for in a game that is a live service. Now, this is a con, but not totally, because some people actually don't mind having smaller DLC drops as opposed to these big, massive ones. But if the player base starts dwindling down, you might not end up seeing all of the content that you were hoping to see in that title. Now, coming up on the last con that I found was important to talk about, and wrapping up the video soon because I don't want it to be too long and people to drop off. So a live service game can be an excuse to release an incomplete or bare bones game with the promise of fixing it in the future or adding sufficient content down the line. So this is something that is a shady practice. So they bring out a game that has very little content, and then just to get that initial profit, initial sale of the game, and saying, okay, yeah, we know that it's a little short on content, but we're going to bring it out in the future. And the first problem with this is if the player base dies and there's not enough players, the devs just say, you know what, this game, there's nothing to do with it, there's not enough people, we're just going to pull out and end the support for it. And the other thing is, you buy this game and you're like, okay, I know there's not a whole lot of stuff to do in it, but eventually it will be complete and there's going to be a lot of stuff to do. The gamer, the consumer, has become complacent and just rolls over and buys the game anyways, even knowing that there is not enough content to last even a month of enjoyment out of that specific product. Now, I don't mean to sound like the holy saint. We are all a culprit of this, of buying games that we know don't have enough content for the money that we're paying when we buy it at launch. But that's just the way the game industry is right now. For example, Sea of Thieves, okay? I know a lot of people like this game, and they say there's a lot of stuff to do. You make your own adventure, but the thing is, Sea of Thieves is a game that was sold that's for $60 and $80 Canadian for that matter, and there was just fuck all to do. There was no progression system. The PvP was pretty goddamn bare bones. The PvE was bare bones as well. It was always go from point A to point B, come back, turn in the mission, and then repeat. Now, a lot of people can say, yeah, you can make your own fun, but that's not the point. You pay for a service, you pay for a product, there should be stuff in there that is worth your money and not something that they would just bring down the line in a few months. So the first big content drop for Sea of Thieves came out a few days ago, or is coming out soon. But I mean, it just sucks that having a game as a live service is an excuse to bring out an incomplete or bare bones game with the promise of fixing it down the line, and sometimes that never actually happens. So wrapping it up, I'm sorry if the video was taking a bit long. I really wanted to make a detailed video on what I think of live service games and the pros and the cons of them. I want to start a discussion on this. I want to know your thoughts in the comments down below. I probably skimmed over a few pros and cons, so if you have more of them or if you have ideas, leave them all in the comments down below. I'd love to get a good discussion going down there. And while you're down there, be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I release first-person shooter-related content pretty much every day. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.